Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and today we are going to be taking a look at Boros Devotion for the Born of the Gods Season of Standard. Now, the sweet thing about this deck is that you get to play a aggressive creature-based strategy in the early game where you stack the board with creatures, you're swinging in at any given opportunity, and you're also stacking the board with more and more devotion with each creature that you cast. Then, from there, we're able to close out the game in the mid-game with cards like Fanatic of Mogis and Stormbreath Dragon. And all of this is kind of possible and accelerated by Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx in this deck, where we just kind of accelerate our mana along based on our devotion, and we're able to cast our bigger creatures in our deck very early, and usually earlier than most opponents could be expecting to have to deal with those cards. Now, the benefit of playing red-white as opposed to just mono red devotion is pretty much just the ability to play a better card base, and we're just kind of able to improve our card quality by playing cards like Chained to the Rocks, Boros Charm, Warleader's Helix, Assemble the Legion, and Revoke Existence in our entire 75. Now, the entire deck list is down in the description below where you guys can check it out. There's also a deck list via TappedOut.net that you guys can check out. The link is in the description. And we also have gameplay for this deck that is available. So you guys can find the links to each one of the gameplay videos in the description. You can check out how this deck plays out up against those matchups. And you can also take note of sideboard strategy that is available and is just kind of gone through in the description of those gameplay videos. So without further ado, now let's actually get to talking about the entire 75 for this deck. So the first card that we have is Ash Zealot. So it's a 2/2 for double red with first strike and haste, and that's pretty much it about it. It's a good card for turn 2 whenever we're trying to swing in with it, and it's pretty decent even in the mid game if we end up like top decking it. It's another creature that can swing in on that given turn just because of that haste, which is pretty much the only redeeming quality that it has whenever it comes down to the mid to late game. We have a playset of Burning-Tree Emissary, which is a 2/2 for double Gruul hybrid, and whenever it enters the battlefield, it's going to add 1 red and 1 green to our mana pool. Now, with that red and green that is provided off of Burning-Tree Emissary, we can go and we can cast any other Burning-Tree Emissaries that we have in our hand, or we can use that mana to activate Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, and generate even more red mana based on our devotion. Or even if it comes down to like the late game, if we are on turn 4 and we have the mana available to cast Fanatic of Mogis, we can start off by playing Burning-Tree Emissary first, and then play our Fanatic of Mogis based on the lands that we still haven't tapped and the mana that's floating with Burning-Tree. The next creature that we have is Frostburn Weird. So it's a 1/4 for double Izzet hybrid, and for 1 red, we are able to give it +1/-1 until the end of the turn. Frostburn Weird is really good because it is a card that can block other aggressive creatures that our opponents are playing, and it can do a pretty good job at that. Or we can just start and swing in at our opponent if we don't have anything else that we can do with our mana, or we don't have a blocker that our opponent could use. Frostburn Weird is just really good in this deck as either a defensive or aggressive based creature. We also have Boros Reckoner in this deck because it is going to add 3 red to our devotion whenever it's on the battlefield. So we have 4 Boros Reckoners, and he's a 3/3 for triple Boros hybrid. And whenever he's dealt damage, he's going to deal that much damage to target creature or player off of that triggered ability. So if our opponent blocks with something like Pelucranos or Desecration Demon, then with that triggered ability off of Boros Reckoner, we can either shoot that damage at that creature to get rid of it, or we can just shoot the damage at our opponent and get them closer to 0. Our kind of centerpiece for the deck is Fanatic of Mogis, playing the most off of our devotion and getting us the most game wins out of any card that we have in this deck. So Fanatic of Mogis is a 4/2 for 4 mana, and whenever he enters the battlefield, he's going to deal damage to each opponent equal to our devotion to red. And usually by the time that we're able to cast our Fanatic of Mogis, we are going to have a pretty sizable devotion of usually at least 8. So if we're able to hit our opponent for like 8 each time that we cast a Fanatic of Mogis, we're in a pretty good position, especially if we've already dealt some damage to our opponent in the earlier game. We have 2 Purphoros, God of the Forge. So Purphoros is kind of a slower card, so he's going to be siding out up against decks that are a little bit more quick-paced and are trying to beat us before we can beat them. He's really good for the slower matchups, however. He's a 6/5 for 4. He has Indestructible, and he's not a creature as long as our devotion to red is less than 5. So whenever our devotion is 5 or greater, he's a creature, he's indestructible, he's a 6/5, and he just bashes face. Now, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, Purphoros is going to deal 2 damage to each opponent, making our creatures a little bit more threatening, especially if we're playing up against control and we're not able to swing in with our creatures because our opponent's using a lot of removal on them. Just even being able to shave down our opponent's life total by our creatures entering the battlefield is just pretty good. And we also have the mode with Purphoros where for 3 mana, creatures we control can get +1/+0 until the end of the turn, thus giving us another resource for being able to just kind of siphon our mana and be able to swing with a whole lot, especially if it's unanswered. We also have a 4-of for Stormbreath Dragon, so 4/4 for 5 mana, Flying Haste Protection from white, and Monsters 3 for 7 mana, allowing us to deal damage to each opponent equal to the number of cards in their hand whenever the Stormbreath Dragon becomes monstrous. And Protection from white has proved to be pretty relevant whenever you are facing up against a lot of different matchups, or even if you have to just use Stormbreath Dragon as a blocker in certain situations. Next we have Chained to the Rocks, so one of our cards that we get to play now that we're Boros and not mono red. So we enchant a mountain that we control, and we're going to cast this for 1 white, and whenever it enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until Chained to the Rocks leaves the battlefield, allowing us to have a answer to cards like Desecration Demon. That's kind of like one of the biggest problems for the mono red devotion decks. If they're not able to win by the time your opponent is casting Desecration Demons, then oftentimes you'll have a really awkward situation with trying to get around them, and because we have Chained to the Rocks, we don't really have to worry about them as much. We do have 2 Mizzium Mortars to deal 4 damage to target creature that we don't control for 2, or 4 damage to each creature we don't control for 6 mana off of the Overload. We have 2 Boros Charms, which can allow us a variety of different modes. So Boros Charm can give our creatures indestructible, which is totally great and awesome because we don't get blown out by cards like Supreme Verdict. It can also deal 4 damage to target player, or we can use the mode where one of our creatures is going to get double strike until the end of the turn, which may be relevant, especially if we're swinging in with something like Purphoros and our opponent isn't blocking it. Being able to deal 12 damage as opposed to just 6 is definitely really awesome. So Boros Charm is pretty playable in each one of the modes, but the mode that we use the most is to make our permanents indestructible and get around cards like Supreme Verdict, or even just spot removal if we need to just kind of stop that from happening. We also have 2 Warleader Helix. So Warleader Helix dealing 4 damage to target creature or player, and we get to gain 4 life for 4 mana at an instant speed. And for the lands in this deck, we have 4 Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, as you guys could imagine, because this is a devotion deck. We have 4 Temple of Triumph and 4 Sacred Foundry for our dual lands. We have 10 basic mountains and then 2 basic plains. And some people prefer to play guild gates. They prefer to play Boros guild gates instead of plains, but I haven't seen too much problem with playing the plains just because it's another land that is going to enter in untapped for us. And otherwise, I just don't want to have way too many cards that are going to be entering in the battlefield tapped. For the sideboard that we have in the deck, we are playing 2 Warleader Helix, so to complement the other 2 that we have in the main board, allowing us to side this in up against decks that are going to be trying to grind us out in the early game. So if we're playing up against decks like Red Burn or Mono White Aggro or the Mono White variants or anything like that, we can side in Warleader Helix, and we can either get rid of one of our opponent's creatures, or we can just have the damage be dealt to our opponent and just kind of get them closer to 0 while also buffing up our actual life total and allowing us to just kind of stay in the game for maybe like another turn or 2. We have 2 Revoke Existence, allowing us to exile target artifact or enchantment, which is pretty good whenever you're facing up against decks that are playing a lot of artifacts or enchantments. So decks that are playing things like gods, decks that are playing things like Detention Sphere, you have the possibility of siding in your Revoke Existence and then being able to deal with problematic cards. Cards like Xenagos, God of Revels could be a problem because your opponent could get bigger creatures than you have, so maybe you might want to side in Revoke Existence against those green-red variants and have the ability to get rid of that Xenagod whenever he hits the table. We also have 2 Mizzium Mortars in the sideboard as well to complement the 2 in the main board. And this is basically just for decks that are playing a lot of creatures that we can just shoot and get rid of with Mizzium Mortars. Especially cards like Pack Rat. Pack Rat's a problem, and it's a really annoying creature, and if we're able to deal with Pack Rat early on, or even be able to respond with a overloaded Mizzium Mortars in the like mid-game, then we're in a pretty good position. Just being able to wipe out our opponent's creatures is always really good, especially if our opponent is just kind of putting everything into their board state and just trying to stack it as far and wide as they can. Being able to overload a Mizzium Mortars is definitely something that can punish them. We do have 2 more Boros Charms for the matchups like Control, where we can side it in and have a easier time getting around that removal that our opponent's going to be playing. We have 2 Assemble the Legion that will side in for the slower matchups that we will encounter, and it's a nice way to have a card that is just going to keep on putting more tokens on the board, and our opponent is going to either constantly have to deal with the creatures that we're playing and putting onto the board, or they're just going to have to deal with Assemble the Legion early on, thus allowing us the opportunity to just kind of get in with another creature like Stormbreath Dragon or something like that. We do have 1 Hammer of Purphoros for these slower matchups as well, where we can side it in, and creatures we have control, or creatures we control have haste for 3 mana, and for 3 mana tap, sack a land, and we get to put a 3/3 colorless golem enchantment creature token onto the battlefield. So the ability to create the golems is good up against the control-based matchups, just because if our opponent doesn't really have any ways to get rid of all of our creatures and is just using spot removal, we're able to produce more creatures than they're usually able to deal with. And even after our opponent uses a Supreme Verdict or something like that on us, we're still able to create a creature at the end of their turn and then be able to swing in with it during the following turn. And the last card that we have in our sideboard here is Skullcrack as a 4/of. So this is probably one of the easiest ways to play up against decks that are playing Grey Merchant or Sphinx's Revelation. And those cards are usually pretty problematic because everything that we've worked for can be unraveled by a huge amount of life gain in one swoop. So being able to side in Skullcrack allows us to say that players can't gain life this turn, damage can't be prevented this turn, and Skullcrack is going to be able to deal 3 damage to target player. And just for 2 mana at an instant speed is pretty good. So that is our entire 75 for Boros Devotion. If you guys enjoyed it, I would appreciate it if you thumbs up this video and subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content. As I mentioned before, we have a bunch of links and stuff in the description that you guys can check out, so be sure to do so. We have gameplay, the deck list, and deck list via TappedOut.net that you guys can check out, and some social media links in the description below for our Facebook and our Twitter page. But until next time, guys, thank you for watching, and peace out. If you guys enjoyed this video and would like to see more Magic the Gathering content, you can hit the subscribe button on the screen and you'll be notified whenever a new video is available. And for those of you guys that enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh!, you can check out my Yu-Gi-Oh! Channel by clicking on the video in the top right hand corner. Also, be sure to check out our sponsors for the channel, ABU Games and Europe's MTG Madness, for all of your Magic the Gathering needs, no matter where you are.